She was breathtakingly beautiful, yet she didn't want men chasing her just for her looks. So before every date, she would send them a photo of an unattractive woman. She thought she'd end up alone forever, until someone actually showed up for the date. But the moment the man saw her, he couldn't believe his eyes. The woman standing before him looked nothing like the photo.
I've deceived you, I'm sorry.
What Julia didn't expect was that this man wasn't being entirely honest either.
But I wrote to you that I am a clerk in a coffee export house, and I am not. I own the house.
Her heart skipped a beat when she learned his name was Luis, a top coffee magnate from Cuba. Tired of his parents constantly pressuring him to marry, Luis had finally snapped and decided to marry just any woman. And yet, fate played a cruel joke on him. When the truth came out, the two exchanged a smile, and in that moment, Julia's soft smile made even a seasoned womanizer like Luis fall completely under her spell. But behind what seemed like a perfect romance was the beginning of a hidden conspiracy. Not long after, they held a grand wedding that took the city by storm. With the priest as their witness, Julia kissed the wedding ring with solemn devotion, as if declaring her loyalty to this love in front of the world. After their vows, Julia invited Luis to dance. Though he had never cared for dancing, he couldn't help but sink into the cheerful rhythm with Julia by his side. This billionaire who once scoffed at love now looked like a boy in the throes of his first crush, completely lost in Julia's deep and captivating eyes. As night fell, they returned to Luis's luxurious mansion, escorted by a team of servants. But on what should have been their wedding night, Julia shyly refused to share a room with him.
You have to give me a few moments. I'm shy of these things.
I will give you as many moments, days, nights as you need. And when you want me to come to you, I will.
Luis's understanding caught her off guard. She had never experienced such gentle tenderness. She softly said goodnight and walked back to her room, unaware of the loving gaze lingering on her back long after she had gone. The next morning, Julia became the perfect, graceful wife. She entered the room with a beautifully prepared breakfast, making Luis's heart skip a beat the moment he opened his eyes. In that moment, she was like a delicate painting brought to life, elegance in every movement. But as Luis sipped the coffee, he frowned slightly. Something wasn't right.
You only drink tea in the morning.
Julia quickly explained it was all because of her overly strict sister in America, who thought coffee was sinful and even liked to read through her letters. To avoid upsetting her sister, she'd told a few harmless lies. The excuse was flimsy, but Luis didn't question it. Instead, he gently reassured Julia that she didn't need to keep suppressing herself. Soon after, he eagerly brought her to tour his business empire. Under the morning sun, they rode horses along the countryside, the warm breeze brushing past their cheeks as if they'd escaped the noise of the world. In that peaceful escape, love quietly began to blossom, their passion growing like vines wrapping around each other's hearts. Fueled by love, Luis's business flourished, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. But life rarely goes as planned. When Julia mentioned she wanted to see a play, Luis bought out the entire theater for her. What was meant to be a romantic gesture ended in heartbreak. During intermission, Luis saw something that shattered him: Julia being overly friendly with a male actor. The unexpected sight sent him into a rage, and he clashed with the theater director who tried to intervene. The chaos only settled when Julia rushed over to calm things down. Love really can cloud judgment. This sharp, successful businessman was swayed by Julia's weak explanation without a second thought. And when he learned she hadn't spoken to her sister in a long time, he even encouraged her to reconnect, offering to mail the letter for her himself. To outsiders, this level of trust might seem naive, but it showed just how easily love can blind someone. After that letter was sent, Julia began waking from terrifying nightmares each night. Whenever she woke up in a panic, Luis would hold her gently and soothe her back to sleep. It was during one of those nights that he discovered the disturbing scars on her back. That moment made him question whether the woman beside him was really who he thought she was. But compassion quickly overtook suspicion. To prove his love, Luis made a bold move. Despite his friend's warnings, he handed over full control of his accounts to Julia. Luis's decision unsettled his father, and in a grave tone, he told him,
"So, Luis, is it love after all, or is it just lust?"
Is there a difference?
Oh, yes. Love someone is to give and then want to give more.
And lust? What is lust, Alan?
Lust is to take, and then take more. To devour, to consume. No logic, no reason.
But Luis turned a deaf ear and told his father.
I want to give her everything. And I want to take everything from her.
Fate always has a way of shifting the course when you least expect it. Just as Luis was about to leave, he ran into a stranger, a man who introduced himself as Walter, a private investigator hired by Julia's sister. He said he was there to check on Julia's well-being. Luis was immediately suspicious, but under Walter's persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to let him visit that weekend. Yet Julia knew nothing about this impending meeting. When Luis returned home, he didn't tell Julia about it right away. Instead, his attention was drawn to her suitcase, still unopened since their arrival. But Julia quickly sat on top of it and claimed she'd lost the key during their trip. Faced with her resistance, Luis chose not to press further. Julia then turned on her charm, sending all the servants away. Yet in the midst of their tender moment, a subtle scent caught Luis's attention. A faint hint of cigarette smoke filled him with suspicion. As far as he knew, Julia had never mentioned smoking. When he looked at her with suspicion, Julia's explanation was so disarming that it shattered all his doubts in an instant.
I wanted the taste of you in my mouth.
With just a little misdirection, she completely erased his suspicions. While soaking in a warm bath together, Luis told Julia that the private investigator would be visiting on Sunday. Lost in the moment, he didn't notice the brief flicker of alarm in her eyes. Suddenly, the canary in the cage let out a harsh, frantic cry.
Oh, when will that damn bird stop its screaming?
By the next morning, the servant found the bird dead in its cage, its slender neck clearly marked by strangulation. Luis's first instinct was to suspect Julia. But when he looked at her angelic face, he immediately felt guilty. How could someone so gentle do something so cruel? He couldn't bring himself to link his delicate wife to such brutality. But the trap of fate was already tightening, and his blind trust would soon become his greatest regret. That very afternoon, a distressed middle-aged woman barged into Luis's office. She claimed to be Julia's sister, and with trembling hands, pulled a letter from her bag. As Luis listened to her words and recalled all the strange things that had happened, it finally dawned on him. Perhaps the woman he married wasn't the one he had been corresponding with all along. The truth hit him like a lightning bolt, tearing apart the dream he had so carefully constructed. In a daze, Luis stumbled home, only to be met with complete silence. Everything of value was gone without a trace. The only thing left was the wedding ring, sitting alone on the nightstand, mocking his naivete. A terrifying thought flashed through his mind. He rushed to the closet, pulled out his hidden handgun, and smashed the lock on Julia's suitcase. Inside, he found clothes and belongings that clearly belonged to a completely different woman. Luis stood frozen, his arms falling limply to his sides. He finally understood everything, and yet he understood nothing at all. His entire world collapsed in that moment, but this was only the beginning of the nightmare. Desperate, he ran to the bank, only to be met with the pitying gaze of the bank manager.
Your wife appeared at 5 minutes to 3 for a last-minute withdrawal.
All the love he had poured out now returned to him like icy blades, piercing through his very soul. Luis shut himself away in the house steeped in betrayal, while the cold, endless rain outside mirrored the desolation in his heart. From that day on, Luis began wandering the darkest corners of the city in search of comfort. By day, he drifted from bar to bar. By night, he numbed himself with fleeting pleasures, trying to fill the emptiness inside. Until one day, a turning point finally arrived. Walter found him again. After hearing Luis's story, he suggested that Julia was likely part of a professional fraud ring. Luis saw a glimmer of hope. He told Walter he would pay any price, do anything, just to find her. Walter looked at the broken man before him, a trace of pity flashing in his eyes.
What good would it possibly do you now? Money's gone. Love. Ruined.
I want to kill her.
Luis's gaze sent a chill down Walter's spine, but he could also hear, in Luis's trembling voice, the burning love that still clouded his judgment. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Luis sold off his last possessions and joined Walter on a voyage across the Atlantic. They searched the ship for clues, and after countless leads, a cruel truth began to surface. Walter suspected that the woman Luis had been writing to may have already perished in the endless sea. This brutal possibility cast an even darker shadow over the already tangled web of lies. After a long and winding journey, they followed the trail all the way to a bustling American town. As soon as they checked into the hotel, Walter took Luis's handgun and left under a vague excuse. That night, alone and disoriented, Luis wandered into the town's most luxurious restaurant. Then, he heard a voice that had haunted his dreams. He followed the sound and finally saw the face he had longed for day and night. But Julia was no longer his. She was now the wife of a military officer, and the sight crushed Luis's heart. Staggering back to the hotel, he found the missing gun mysteriously returned to his room. At the same time Julia was running her usual play, she deftly dismissed the colonel who had come seeking pleasure and turned to write a letter to a man named Billy. But just as she reached for her pen, she caught sight of a reflection in the mirror. Luis, the man who had once truly loved her, now standing behind her with a twisted expression on his face.
What are your plans for me?
My plans? I just came here to kill you.
Though Luis threatened her, Julia remained eerily calm. When Luis pulled out the gun, Julia even let out a laugh, then calmly guided the trembling barrel to her own heart. But Luis didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he dropped a bombshell. The woman whose identity Julia had stolen was dead. The revelation hit her like a thunderclap. The color drained from her face. In a shaky voice, she denied it, saying Billy had only told her the woman had gone north and had arranged for her to marry Luis. He had never mentioned anything about killing her. Luis's bloodshot eyes burned with fury as he demanded to know who Billy really was. Julia's gaze wavered. Then she replied, "He's my closest friend, my accomplice, and her former lover. I once swore I'd sever all ties with him, but in the end, I couldn't escape this doomed entanglement."
Damn it, I was falling in love with my own husband. God, I could have bought him off! I could have kept him away! Only you made me write to her sister and then it was all over!
Enraged, Luis shoved her to the floor. His eyes burned with hatred, yet behind it was a sorrow too deep for words. He wanted to end it all, put an end to the woman who had deceived him, but it was as if an invisible force froze his finger on the trigger. Love and hatred clashed in his heart. Logic and emotion wrestled for control. His soul felt torn in two, one half screaming for revenge, the other begging for mercy. Eventually, his emotional dam burst. He could no longer resist his feelings and pulled Julia tightly into his arms. Despite the lies and betrayal, the sincerity of their original love remained untouched. That night, wrapped in apologies and reconciliation, they fell asleep in each other's embrace. At dawn, Julia finally revealed her real name, Bonnie. She slowly opened up to Luis, telling him that she and Billy were orphans, and it was Billy who had pulled her out of a dark, hopeless life. But as Luis listened, his heart sank deeper and deeper. Love could give everything, but it could never bear to be shared. That thought crept into his heart like a shadow, casting a chill over the warmth they had just rebuilt.
You are Julia Russell from Wilmington, Delaware. You were born the day you stepped off that boat and became my wife.
And yet, in that moment, Julia felt a warmth she had never known before. Looking back on her encounter with Luis, it felt like a fated romance. She gladly embraced the identity of Julia and slipped the wedding ring, symbol of their vows, back onto her finger. When the colonel came to collect her, Julia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the gun and fiercely drove him away. But the happiness was short-lived. Just as Luis was about to inform Walter that he had found Julia, Walter beat him to the punch with shocking news. The police had recovered the body of the woman Julia had impersonated. Her neck bore an unusual knife wound. Luis immediately recalled the strange dagger Julia had left behind when she ran. To protect the woman he loved, he chose to keep the truth hidden and fled with Julia. After a long, frantic journey, they settled in a remote little town, renting a sunny house and starting a quiet life as an ordinary couple. Their days were simple yet sweet, bringing color back to lives that had once been shrouded in darkness. But fate wasn't done with them yet. Just when Luis thought he had found peace, Walter, whom he had tried so hard to leave behind, reappeared like a ghost. Luis's heart tightened at the unexpected visit. Hiding his panic, he told Walter that he'd given up on looking for Julia. then quickly sent him off. Back at home, Luis rushed to pack up valuables, fetched the loaded gun, and prepared to flee with Julia once again. But then, footsteps echoed from the stairwell, making his body tense with fear. Luis denied Julia's presence, but Walter was unrelenting. In that life-or-death moment, Luis fired. The bullet ripped through the air, and Walter collapsed to the ground. Luis, stunned, stepped forward to check if he was still alive, but Julia stopped him. Unlike Luis's frantic state, Julia was astonishingly calm. She quickly devised a plan, instructing Luis to buy 2 train tickets and escape immediately. Still dazed, Luis did exactly as she said. But as he left, a bigger deception was already unfolding. Julia slowly walked over to the body and peeled off Walter's carefully crafted fake mustache. It turned out he was none other than Julia's lover, Billy. He had tampered with the gun the first time he stole it from Luis, replacing the bullets. Panicked and desperate, Luis had completely missed this deadly detail. Billy told Julia, "Luis sold everything he had just to find you. He's now even wealthier than before. If we get rid of him, you'll inherit everything as his wife." But his words made Julia sick to her stomach. She finally saw Billy for who he truly was, a man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn for profit. And that foolish man they had tricked, he had melted her heart with genuine love. Julia stared at Billy, her eyes filled with a new, steely resolve.
He loves me.
No one loves you, Bonnie. No one could. Except for me.
Memories came flooding back, each one whispering like a devil in her ear. Billy's threats left her with no choice but to obey. When Luis returned with the tickets, Julia had shed all warmth. She was once again the cold, unfeeling Bonnie. She led Luis to a secluded cottage where they could lay low. With their cash nearly gone, Luis suggested going to Santiago to collect a check. Luis's suggestion pierced Julia's heart. She knew Billy was eavesdropping outside. If Luis got that money, Billy would kill him. That night, Julia awoke from another nightmare, and Luis held her gently, just like always. Maybe it was a spark of guilt, or maybe it was love. But Julia was determined. She couldn't let Luis go back to Santiago. To ease their financial troubles, she made a bold move. She taught Luis how to gamble. With care and patience, she showed him how to read the secret codes. Then, together, they slipped into the world of underground casinos. Julia transformed herself into a graceful waitress, gliding effortlessly between card tables. Every seemingly casual gesture she made was, in fact, a carefully crafted signal. Luis picked up on each cue, steadily building their winnings. But the good times didn't last. Seasoned gamblers began to eye the couple suspiciously, their unusual win streak raising red flags.
Will you ask the lady to retire, sir?
Luis wanted to take Julia and escape this place filled with trouble. But then came a remark, sharp as a knife, that pierced Luis right where it hurt most.
It's a man who will use a woman to do his cheating for.
Luis snatched the bottle from Julia's hand and, without a word, launched himself into a fight with the others. Outnumbered and outmatched, Luis was beaten badly and thrown down a flight of stairs. Julia, on the other hand, was forced to stay behind to settle the debt, like a helpless fish on the chopping block, at the mercy of others. No one knew how much time passed before she stumbled out, disheveled and bruised. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Luis. It was in that moment she seemed to awaken from a dream, realizing that someone like her could never be worthy of a man like Luis. She stood in silence, watching as Luis climbed aboard a carriage bound for Santiago. Later, Julia brought Billy into the home she once shared with Luis, letting him leave fresh scars across her skin. Pain and pleasure twisted into one, a mirror of her shattered life, forever teetering between darkness and light. After Luis retrieved his savings, Julia made an excuse to step out. A wave of unease washed over him. He followed. Through the dark alleys, he arrived at a place reeking of cheap perfume. His heart pounded, something deep inside warning him of the horror ahead. And then he saw it, Billy, holding Julia close. Luis's world crumbled. But what followed cut even deeper. He heard Julia say she planned to run away with Billy, taking all of Luis's money. Billy, however, insisted they had to kill him. Luis reeled. Stumbling back in shock, he fled the scene like a man escaping a nightmare. But he didn't run away. He sat in the darkened room, waiting for the woman who had broken his heart to return.
I was thinking that if I ever lost you, my life would be over. There would be nothing left for me except to die.
Luis's sincere words didn't stir the slightest emotion in Julia. Her indifference hit him like a plunge into icy water. His entire world felt like a barren, lifeless desert. When Julia handed him the cup of poisoned coffee, he seemed to have already sensed it. His voice carried a trace of bitter irony. Then he slowly drew the gun hidden beneath his coat and revealed that he had followed her.
Where?
Outside waiting when I turn the lights off.
And I'm dead?
Without hesitation, Julia nodded. Her eyes, surprisingly, held a hint of relief. To her, dying by the hands of the man who truly loved her might be the gentlest ending possible. But the words Luis said next shattered the calm mask she had so carefully held together.
Do you laugh at me for how stupid I have been now?
No.
Laugh now when I tell you this. I loved you, Julia.
His words pierced her heart like a blade. She had never believed in love, and when real love did arrive, she destroyed it with her own hands. The cruelest irony was that, in this very moment, she finally realized Luis was the only person in her life truly worth trusting. But it was already too late. To protect her from Billy's abuse, Luis downed the poisoned coffee without hesitation. Julia panicked, trying to stop him, but it was already too late. Just then, the lights went out. Like a predator drawn by blood, Billy burst into the house. Julia, cradling the trembling Luis, stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape. But fate had other plans. At the station, Billy was already waiting. Luis, shaking from the poison, lifted the gun with great effort. His vision was blurring, but his will remained sharp. He aimed straight at Billy. Billy froze, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Julia lunged, snatching the gun from Luis's hands and shielding him behind her. She could no longer let the man who loved her bear any more pain. As Billy crawled forward, begging for mercy, Julia didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the platform. Billy collapsed to the ground, but it was too late. Luis's breaths grew faint, his face pale as snow. Julia cradled him, tears streaming down her face. She whispered her love over and over, her trembling fingers gently brushing against Luis's gradually cooling face. But death does not grant mercy. The tide of pain and sorrow finally receded. Julia was sentenced to death for murder. And yet, fate seemed to offer her one final twist. A young priest, moved by the depth of her story, was profoundly touched by their tragic love. On the day of her execution, something unexpected happened. The figure beneath the white robe was eerily still. Suspicious, the guards yanked off the hood. The sight before them made everyone gasp in shock. Julia was gone, and in her place stood the priest. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in a pristine white building, Julia appeared like a blooming daisy, gracefully stepping inside. Wearing a flowing white dress, she walked slowly toward a table, the lights bathing her in a soft glow. Everyone was unconsciously drawn to her, utterly captivated by her presence. Amid the chorus of gasps, her eyes fell on a familiar figure. It was Luis, the man she thought she had lost forever. This film paints a haunting portrait of the tangled emotions between Julia and Luis, exploring the delicate line between trust and betrayal, sincerity and deception. Julia's beauty, intertwined with her lies, becomes a symbol of her inner turmoil and emotional conflict. Luis's blind trust, on the other hand, reveals the innocence and fragility that often accompany love. The story serves as a reminder that love doesn't always conquer all. Sometimes, it is torn apart by lies and fate. Yet even in the depths of despair, love can still offer redemption and forgiveness, though that redemption often comes hand in hand with pain and regret.